Charles. Great to have you here.
Thanks. So yeah, as Brad said, I was here on Tuesday, and we were really quite flexible about what we were doing. So on Tuesday, I wandered around a bit, and I talked to a few of you, as you know, and people threw questions at me which I didn't know the answer to. You get the general idea. So there was a day of that, and then this morning I came back again. So this is the second day. I mean, in general, I've been to Fremantle before, but not in the context of really focusing on it in this way. One of the things you might say is, why the hell is this creativity idea an important issue and regarded as a new currency? Because the way we're talking about it, or I'm talking about it, is not creativity as art. Of course, there is a lot of creativity in art, as we well know. Nor am I talking about creativity as the creative economy, only the music industry and the design industry and all of that. But of course that's part of it and is extremely important. Nor am I talking about creativity as a creative class, all of those people plus all the knowledge nomads in universities and researchers, although that is incredibly important, because that amounts to probably about 25% of people in Fremantle. When I'm talking about the creative city notion, it's really a culture of creativity as a whole, because it's also interesting what those other 75% of people do. And the reason why creativity is obviously a central issue is that most places around the world are transforming dramatically. And in that dramatic change, they all need to rethink, and rethinking and repositioning yourself is a creative process. Creativity is central to making and creating and shaping livable cities. It's partly, it's obviously about an empowering process, getting more people involved, but also using imaginative ideas to actually deal with any problem along the way. Many people, and perhaps not in Fremantle, but other cities, they'd always say to people like me or yourself, well, what's the value of all this stuff you're talking about? You keep on banging on about these sorts of words that are up there. And I think it's quite important, actually, really, and this is what I think the big shift that's occurring, is to shift the question, what's the cost of actually not thinking in these more imaginative ways? What's the cost of not understanding how economic capital and social capital link together? What's the cost of not having quality design? What's the cost of doing things as a city which is down to a price rather than up to a standard, which was one of my key mantras in the work I was doing in Perth? What is a creative place? A creative place is a sort of place where people mix and connect. Let's just remember that, because that's some of the big issues that come out. Mixing and connecting between groups, between the economic, the cultural, the social, for example, between different subsectors of the city. And it's a good blend of non-commercial things which don't have the bottom line in them and highly commercial things at the same time. And it's that good blend that usually makes places good. And interestingly enough, even though you all know, of course, about the mania about building icons and all this sort of stuff, great places actually have lots of very ordinary things in them, like a good street. I don't know what you think, but if I'm thinking of what makes a great city, usually, if you look at it, it's great streets that make it. And what is a great street? A great street is diverse. It hasn't got McDonald's, Subway, Burger King following by each other. So, in terms of this creativity thing, one of the other reasons why people talk about it in the context of cities is that if you have a company, you of course always have a research and development department. If you didn't, you'd say, oh, you're absolutely stupid in a company not to have an R&D department. How does a city, though, have an R&D department? And one of the ways it has it is, firstly, encouraging people to be curious about their place, which is quite a Fremantle thing, therefore unleashing the imagination out of which some ideas happen. There's just as much creativity in turning an idea into reality, in being able to communicate it, in being able to then set up a new conversation and so on. So just so we get this notion that this is a sort of circular thing. So this was the Creative City Index that we did this morning. Now in general it was quite interesting. These are just general comments. The newcomers in the group were generally more positive. The insiders who'd been there quite a long time, some of them were slightly jaded. There was a very big range between the positive and negative. I mean, in terms of what they thought was good or what they thought was bad. These are just general comments. And of course, the group that was there, which was about 20 people, was of a type. You know, it was whoever was there. You know, it wasn't representative of the totality of, you know, of Fremantle. But it was a reasonable group, and I wouldn't be surprised that you would come up with similar, well, I hope you would. But that's the proviso. So what we're talking about here is a snapshot. The first thing is, what is the political and public framework, the wider context within which you operate as Fremantle? And is that something that's encouraging you to get the things done that you need to do? So the sort of issues are civic creativity. Civic creativity means the public sector being entrepreneurial within accountability principles, in a sense of knowing exactly where you want to go, but being tactically flexible. We've already highlighted that that's difficult in the Fremantle context, because if you're being a bit tactically flexible, someone said, well, you promised to do this, but you're moving slightly there, but why are you going this way to get to the goal? And sometimes that's the only way of reaching it. So that was our assessment. Boom. So there was wide-ranging opinions. Now, it was fantastic. The first group who came up said 3, which is basically very bad. And the reason why it's bad, of course, is many of the things you want to do, you can't do. You can't do because someone else is actually bossing you around. There's a federal state, there's rules. Here was interesting that the people who came from outside, who were not in the local authority, funnily enough, felt not so constrained. They felt things were going okay. And this is a very important point, that whilst there's a sort of generalised, this comes up again and again, a generalised cultural, social sense of what Fremantle should be, the economic is detached. I haven't heard anyone saying, this is the economic future of Fremantle, this is what we're going to survive on, this is going to be the thing that's going to pay for all these social inclusion projects that we need and want and so on. And that seems to me a major disconnect. The second domain that we were assessing is how distinctive, diverse, vital, how full of expression is Fremantle. Right, ready, steady, go! Not bad, but again I was surprised. This is a different group, by the way, because I thought the distinctiveness thing would be sort of quite high immediately, sort of instinctively I thought that. Anyway, this group's at 4.5, and it's a sort of rather ordinary place. It's not that distinctive and so on. Clearly it's high, but some people said, but we're always comparing ourselves with WA. Well, if you're comparing yourself with Perth, that's no contest, is it? But a danger of declining, a loss of edginess. That the edginess is partly the cutting edginess, because we're not only talking here art and culture when we say distinctiveness, it could be products, services, because I think, again, this point about the economics, reality being important. The third area we looked at was how open, how much trust, tolerance and accessibility in general there is. And clearly, for a place to develop, leaving aside creativity or anything like that, openness is absolutely key, because that generates the capacity to develop, but also resilience. And the score was, well, again, do you know that point I was making about those differences? That is quite stark. There's a gutsy working class culture which is in a sense the source of Fremantle, as far as I understand it, one of the core essences of the city. But the new diversity, which is coming in with completely different sort of people who aren't working within an industrial context. And then obviously the sort of hippie tradition and easygoingness and so on. But so there's elements there which I basically thought it might be higher, but that's not bad. That's how I felt about it. Sorry we're closed, coming we're open. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like that. The next one was how entrepreneurial, exploratory and innovative is the place. This is not only in the commercial sense, which of course is incredibly important, but also in terms of social entrepreneurship, in terms of public entrepreneurship, because a lot of city development is about the public sector being entrepreneurial itself in various ways. So, Bob, I mean, these two people here, number 2 and 7, having different experiences of Fremantle quite clearly. So the main comments were, there isn't active encouragement and whatever, support infrastructure and so on. There are pockets of innovation, but also that we heard, or I heard rather, what I would suggest are standard-setting social examples, which I thought was fantastic. Can someone remind me of all these things that we're talking about? The lasagna thing as an example.
The Harvard Street Fiesta and the lasagna bake-off.
All these sort of things which are slightly bizarre but interesting, and obviously require a lot of organisation and basically innovative and interesting, that's all I can say. I wish I was there myself.